The Ottoman Empire was a formidable power. Many Christian powers were afraid of the geopolitical and religious consequences of losing to the Islamic Ottomans. However, the arch-nemesis of the Ottoman Empire would prove to be not the West, but the power coming from the East. The Russian Empire, led by several Tsars, would crush systematically the Ottoman forces during the 18th and 19th centuries. 12 wars and a lot of bloodshed. Both rivals saw the conflict from their own perspectives. The Russian Empire had geopolitical interest to push south towards the Black Sea, trying to obtain a warm seaport and access to global trade routes outside of the Dardanelles. The outsiders would call this conflict the Oriental Question, concerning the sickness of the Ottoman Empire, the Christian Balkans, and the Caucasian area. The Russians in the 19th century would use the double front to weaken the Ottoman logistics system and create a mandala system, crushing the enemy in the middle. Therefore, it must be considered the importance of the Russian element in the downfall of the Ottomans. In this video, we will analyze the economic, military, technological, socio-political factors that led to the dismay of the Ottomans. Our main focus will be on the 18th and 19th centuries. First of all, Peter the Great modernized Russia according to Western ideals of technology and power elements. The next century, the Ottoman Empire would try to do the same with Tanzimat. The Christian Tsarist Empire and Islamic Ottoman Empire would become the first great powers outside of Western Europe to westernize. In both cases, the social effects were harsh. On the other hand, Russia became an expansionist menace, while the Ottoman was on the brink of the defensive. Let's start with the 18th century. To understand why the Ottoman Empire crumbled, we must look past the battlefields and examine the structural machinery of both states. By the early 1700s, the Russian Empire underwent a radical transformation. Tsar Peter the Great forcefully modernized Russia, turning an isolated semi-feudal tsardom into a hyper-centralized bureaucratic machine capable of massive resource mobilization. Peter introduced lifelong conscription, developed the domestic metallurgical industry in the Urals, and built a navy from scratch. Russia became an empire engineered for long-term logistical wars of attrition. Meanwhile, the Sublime Porte was moving in the exact opposite direction. While St. Petersburg was centralizing, Istanbul was losing its grip on its peripheries. The 18th century saw the dangerous rise of the Ayans, local provincial notables and pashas who acted as semi-independent warlords. A prime example was Osman Pasvantoglu, the Pasha of Vidin, who openly defied the Sultan, minted his own coin, and even launched devastating raids into the neighboring Romanian principalities. When Russia attacked, the Sultan could not rely on a cohesive, modern military response. He first had to negotiate with, or brutally suppress, his own rebellious pashas. The Ottomans were not lacking in courage, but they were fatally lacking in administrative unity. This institutional imbalance allowed Russia to launch what can be described as a geopolitical anaconda strategy, systematically squeezing the Ottoman Empire's northern borders along a precise sequence of rivers and coastlines. First came the Treaty of Kuchuk-Kainarji in 1774, where Russia forced its way to the Black Sea coast, establishing a foothold between the Dnieper and the Bug rivers. But a true catastrophic shift occurred in 1783, when Empress Catherine the Great annexed the Crimean Khanate, a crucial Ottoman vassal state. Crimea was turned into Russia's unsinkable aircraft carrier, in the Black Sea, becoming the permanent base for the newly founded Russian Black Sea Fleet at Sevastopol. The march did not stop there. By 1792, the Treaty of Jassy-Yash pushed the Russian border to the Dniester, placing the Tsarist armies directly at the gates of the Romanian Principality of Moldavia. To paralyze the Ottoman response, Russia utilized a brilliant double front or mandala system. Whenever a war started on the Danube, Russian armies simultaneously opened a massive second front in the Caucasus, tearing through the mountains of Georgia and Armenia. This forced the Sultan to split his logistics, his treasures, and his men between two brutally distant theaters of war, slowly building the Ottoman military apparatus to death. This territorial advance was accompanied by a powerful ideological and diplomatic offensive. Empress Catherine the Great famously envisioned the Greek project, a grand pseudo-Byzantine ambition aimed at restoring the Byzantine Empire, with a Russian prince on the throne in Constantinople. To lay the groundwork, the Treaty of Küçükayınlarca in 1774 allowed Russia to establish permanent diplomatic consulates within the Ottoman territories, including the Romanian principalities. This created a massive breach in the Ottoman economic monopoly, as Russian diplomats effectively shielded local merchants, turned Wallachia and Moldavia into hotbeds for anti-Ottoman espionage, and began draining the economic inputs that Istanbul so desperately relied upon. By the early 19th century, the structural cracks within the Ottoman state grew into giant chasms. The year 1826 became a tragic, self-inflicted turning point for the Sublime Porte. In the midst of the Greek War of Independence, Sultan Mehmed II took a desperate gamble. He ordered the brutal slaughter and dissolution of his own elite military caste, the Janissaries, an event known as the Auspicious Incident. While the Janissaries were indeed corrupt and resistant to modernization, destroying them overnight created a massive military vacuum. When Russia launched a new offensive in 1828, the Sultan's newborn, untested army of teenage conscripts stood no chance against a disciplined Russian machine. The war concluded with the monumental Treaty of Adrianople in 1829, which guided Hitchins' analysis as a structural death blow to Ottoman hegemony. For centuries, Wallachia and Moldavia functioned as the vital granary of Istanbul, forced to supply grain, livestock, and raw materials to the Ottoman capital at artificially low monopoly-controlled prices. Adrianople shattered this economic monopoly forever. The Romanian principalities were granted full freedom of trade, meaning Romanian wheat and cattle were no longer funneled to Istanbul for pennies, but sold to Western Europe for gold. For the Ottoman Empire, this was a dual catastrophe. It lost its primary economic input, triggering food shortages and inflation in Istanbul, precisely when the state needed unprecedented financial resources to fund its new military and administrative reforms. The Russian imposed protectorate and introduction of the organic regulations further decoupled the principalities from the Ottoman administrative orbit, setting a structural precedent for future Balkan emancipation. The mid-19th century brought a paradox that reshaped the destiny of both empires. The Crimean War 1853-1856 was technically a military defeat for Russia, as a coalition of Britain, France and the Ottoman Empire successfully checked Tsarist expansion. However, in the grand arena of realpolitik, this defeat acted as a brutal wake-up for calls from St. Petersburg. Tsar Alexander II realized that his agrarian, serf-based empire could no longer compete with the industrialized Western powers. The result was a structural earthquake. In 1861, Alexander II abolished serfdom, effectively ending Russia's authentic medieval era. This monumental social reform unlocked a massive pool of free labor, kick-started Russian industrialization, and allowed the military to transition into a modern conscription-based army with vast human reserves. Russia lost the war, but it gained the structural foundation to build a far more lethal war machine. Conversely, the Ottoman Empire entered the tragic loop of borrowed time. To counter the Russian menace, the Sublime Porte embarked on the Tanzimat reforms, 1839-1876, attempting to westernize its fiscal, legal and educational systems. But unlike Russia, which possessed a domestic industrial base in the Urals and state-owned arms factories like Tula, the Ottomans lacked internal industrial productivity. The vilayets, provinces, were bleeding resources, and agricultural output was stifled by crushing tax burdens. To fund this modernization and purchase cutting-edge Western weapons such as Krupp artillery and British rifles, the port was forced to take massive loans from European banks. This created a zero-sum arms race. The money spent on the Ottoman military didn't stimulate the local economy, it flowed right back to the West. By 1875, this financial hemorrhage culminated in the sovereign bankruptcy of the Ottoman state, leaving it financially paralyzed and institutionally hollow right when Russia was preparing its final offensive. The final act of this centuries-old duel was triggered not in the halls of diplomacy, but by a bloody uprising in the Balkans. In 1876, the Bulgarian population rose against the Ottoman rule. The Sublime Porte responded with terrifying brutality, utilizing irregular troops, the Bashi Buzuks, to massacre thousands of civilians, most notably in Batak. The graphic horrors shocked the Western public conscience, leaving the Ottoman Empire diplomatically isolated. For Russia, this humanitarian catastrophe provided the perfect moral and ideological pretext. Under the banners of pan-Slavism and pan-Orthodoxy, the Russian Empire declared war in 1877, presenting itself as the ultimate savior of the Balkan Christians. However, historical equity demands that we recognize local actors were not mere pawns in a Tsarist game. The Russian military machine crossed the Danube but soon found itself completely paralyzed in front of the strategic fortress of Pleven, where the Ottoman commander Osman Pasha mounted a brilliant and bloody defense. Facing a disastrous logistical collapse on Bulgarian soil, the Russian leadership desperately appealed for help from Prince Carol I of Romania. The Romanian army crossed the Danube, took over the command of the joint forces at Pleven, and through immense sacrifice at Krivica and Smordan Redouts, broke the backbone of the Ottoman defense. The resulting victory led to the Treaty of San Stefano and the Congress of Berlin in 1878, which cemented the definitive downfall of Ottoman hegemony in Europe. Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro achieved full international independence, while a major autonomous Bulgarian state was born. History is rarely a story written in black and white, and it cannot be judged through the lens of modern political biases. From a standpoint of pure, unadulterated realpolitik, the Russian Empire acted as an aggressive, expansionist superpower driven by its own selfish geostrategic interests, namely territorial growth, regional hegemony, and a warm water window to the Mediterranean. Yet, looking at the long-term historical structural balance, Russia's pragmatic aggression was the only physical battering ram powerful enough to shatter the centuries-old Islamic status quo in the southern Eastern Europe. Without the constant grinding pressure of the Russian military machine over 12 bloody wars, the Ottoman millet system would have endured for decades longer. It was the Tsarist Empire that systematically forced open the gates of history, allowing the Romanian Balkan peoples to finally achieve national emancipation and rewrite the map of Europe forever. Thank you so much.